So for our agenda, welcome and introductions. So we have a lot of folks with us from the Office of Civil Legal Aid. So welcome to you all. And otherwise, it looks like a lot of people familiar with who we are and used to attending our meetings. So we're going to start with the July minutes. Are there any amendments, changes, edits to the July minutes? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Great. And Dave second. Great. All in favor of approving the July minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Looks unanimous. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right. So our next item is ATJ Board new member announcements. So we have with us our two new members to the board, Mercedes Riggs and Nick Larson. So wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the community. So Mercedes, would you like to go first?
Sure. Nice to meet y'all. And nice to be here today. My name is Mercedes Riggs. I am an immigration attorney and I work for SOAR Immigration Legal Services, which is a nonprofit based in Portland, but has a service area of the Portland metro area, including Southwest Washington. So my job there is the asylum program managing attorney. And I was really excited to join the board because I wanted to make sure that my fellow Southwest Washingtonians, my fellow Vancouver and Clark County people had a stake in making sure, sorry, I can't talk, that the Southwest Washington also gets adequate access to justice. And also as somebody that represents a lot of people that are undocumented and that are immigrants, I wanted to make sure that at least from the immigration attorney perspective, that there was some representation on the board as well. So really happy to be a member, and yeah, hi.
Thank you, and we are very happy to have you as a member representing Southwest Washington. Woohoo! Nick Larson.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good to be here. I am a civil litigation attorney in Seattle. I've been practicing for many years and was the co-chair for several years of the WSBA Pro Bono and Public Service Committee. And on that committee, I was the liaison to the ATJ Board. And that's how I first got into these massive Zoom meetings and got to enjoy and see what the ATJ Board was all about. And it was a lot of overlap with what we were about in that committee. And so I feel very happy to be here. And as I've said to the ATJ Board, I have an interesting perspective in that sometimes I'm in court opposite of folks that I think directly benefit from what the ATJ Board is trying to do, and to see the obstacles, barriers, and also some of the progress that's been made from work that the ATJ Board and many others have done. I think it's something that I want to keep observing, but also keep sharing. So it's great to be here.
Great, and we are very happy to have you as well. We, just so that everyone knows, we had a resignation earlier in the summer. We did not do a search because our previous search was still fresh. And so we have offered the position to somebody from the previous search, and we are waiting for it to go through the appointment process before we announce their name. So, and then we will be back up to our full complement of 10 folks. We anticipate 2 people will be rolling off the board next year because their term limited, including myself. So there will be at least 2 spots next year when we open in like March or April for the call for volunteers. All right. ATJ Board stipends policy update. Diana.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Diana Singleton, and I help staff the Access to Justice Board. And I'm working with our lived experience stipend work group, who includes SB, Jeremiah, Vanna, and Bren. So Jeremiah and SB, who are here today, chime in. But I'm just going to share a very brief update about the work that we've been doing. If folks here today recall, back in the spring, the Access to Justice Board, actually back in January of this year, the Access to Justice Board had voted to approve its approach to paying people with lived experience of systemic oppression who not only have served on our community advisory panel, who we have been paying, but who also serve on our board as well. And so that's a decision that the board made. Then following that decision was implementing that, namely getting funding. And so that is sort of the hurdle that we're trying to get over. And so with that, we had requested funding from both the Supreme Court, who has provided funding to the ATJ Board over the years, as well as the Washington State Bar Association. With regards to the Washington State Bar Association, we had made that request in the early part of its budgeting process in the spring. And the feedback that the board got was, wasn't necessarily a no, but it was it would be great if there was a policy at the Bar Association from which we can base a decision for funding. And so with that, the ATJ Board decided to create a proposed policy for the Bar Association around paying people with lived experience of systemic oppression for any bar entity. And so that's what this work group has been doing. The process that we've undergone so far is we've done power mapping to identify who we want to center in this process. And then we are about to send out a very, very short survey to community folks, to bar entities, to all of you and beyond, to get your input of what should inform excuse me, our proposed policy, which our goal is to ultimately propose it to the Board of Governors in their May meeting. And so between now and then will be a lot of feedback and input from all of you and others, and then continuing to get feedback as we put that draft together. And just as a side note, getting back to our original request for funding to the Supreme Court, we just learned a couple of weeks ago that the Supreme Court did put in their requested budget for funding for lived experience stipends. We don't know how much or whether if they get the funding, if that would completely fund our original request. But we think that's a good a sign in a good direction that the Supreme Court is putting their money where their mouth is in terms of wanting to support the work of the ATJ Board and prioritizing communities who are closest to the issues that we're all trying to work around. So I'm going to pause and see if Jeremiah wants to chime in. It looks like SB's maybe still trying to join. So, but Jeremiah, if you have any other thoughts.
No, I think that covers it. Thank you, Diana.
Great, thanks.
Are there questions for Diana?
Diana, I have a question.
Yeah.
One question. So when do you think the board will be able to view a draft, or what's the timeline look like between now and May? And
Yes. So we're just actually finalizing our timeline, but our goal is to have our initial draft to the ATJ Board in January. And then after that, continue to seek feedback. And also I should note, getting feedback from the Washington State Bar Association's Board of Governors Budget and Audit Committee, because they're the ones who are ultimately going to kind of be grappling with it to share with the larger Board of Governors. And so also we have planned into our timeline, meeting with them a couple times, and then again, meeting back with getting the ATJ Board's input, I think in April. But the initial draft we should have by January. That's our goal.
And because because 2024 is a short legislative session, hopefully by the end of or middle of March, we will know whether or not the court's request for compensation was funded. So we probably won't be able to touch that money until July 1st, but at least we'll have a sense of whether or not it got funded. So I'm assuming, but I might be wrong, a person who just joined 206 who ends in 103, is that Esperanza?
Yes, it is. Can you hear? Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
I can
Hello?
hear you, yes.
Oh,
Yes.
great.
Can you hear
okay,
us?
it is me. Thank you. Yes, I can. Thank you. Sorry about this.
Okay, well, we're talking.
Yeah.
Hey,
Go ahead.
Diana,
We
one
do
other-
what we can do.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mhm.
So we're talking about the budget request and the budget policy, and then we're going to switch to the ATJ conference. So
Okay.
we'll come back.
Yeah.
We'll come back to you, Mike.
Mhm.
Diana, one other question. So, is the board is the WSBA audit committee, are they going to look at like an impact analysis, like how this policy would impact, like who would be, how the policy would be implemented and impacted, and do that sort of assessment? Is that what their role would be in terms of looking at that policy?
I would say yes and no. So in terms of an impact analysis, the bar, when anything comes before the Board of Governors, the Bar Association does 3 analyses. One is a fiscal analysis, another one is legal risk, and the third one is an equity analysis. So staff usually handle that in terms of preparing something for the Board of Governors to consider. And I think the fiscal analysis, in particular, the Budget and Audit Committee may be involved with that, but ultimately it's the Director of Finance who handles doing that. In terms of the role for the Budget and Audit Committee, my thought is that their role would be to ask the questions, share their concerns, name the things that they want the Access to Justice Board to address, so that we could do that before ultimately proposing it to the Board of Governors. So it's kind of to get a sounding board with a smaller group of Board of Governor members before we put together the final draft.
Thank you.
Other questions for Diana? All right. Anything else, Diana, you wanted to add to that?
I think the only thing, and I'll share with the ATJ board later, is that the work group, we're putting together a list of who we want to reach out to beyond sort of broader listservs and things like that for the input. And so I'll share that with the board later, because the more contacts and networks you could share, the broader and deeper our outreach can be in making sure that we are gathering plenty of input.
Great. Thank you. All right. Esperanza, do you want to give the update on the ATJ conference?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I can't tell by the little signals on my phone, so I apologize for that. So anyway, I want to start this by stating that we came to this place for this particular conference after looking at evaluating and looking at the conference 2 years ago and our trip to Wenatchee, and really listening to people in Disco and just in a lot of different places that the ATJ board has been involved in, committees. And so we learned a lot. So this conference the title, Shifting Justice Towards Accountability and Trusting to Fit what everybody was talking about, people were concerned about, the issues that were being brought up. Our conference was, as you all know, September 28th through the 30th. We had over 600 participants in the conference. It was a hybrid conference. We feel it was very successful given the number of people who participated, the fact that we had some people who were virtual, a lot of folks that were in person wearing masks, many of them wearing masks. And so from that standpoint, we think we did, the committee did a really good job in terms of outreach and trying to really listen to and address the accessibility issues of people who wanted to attend, and really reaching out into the community. Let's see, I don't have access to my computer because I'm on the phone and I'm having a lot of technical problems today, but we had a wonderful, powerful and inspiring welcoming from Legislator Jamila Taylor. Our opening with the Puyallup tribe was very powerful. They invited us to come and visit them and get to know them, get to know about the culture. And we should all take advantage of that. Those are opportunities to be able to make connections with a whole community that many of us have expressed is challenging to figure out how to connect. So we're hoping that some people took advantage of the fact that they were there and we were on their, well, we're on native land anywhere we go in this country. But we were on the Puyallup land at that time. Let's see what else. We were really excited about the community allies that we had. La Resistencia had a beautiful display on the wall there that people got to see. Fly Start Foundation had tables that they were sharing some of the artwork of incarcerated youth. And hopefully you all got to see some of that, buy some of those things. The ATJ Awards went very well in terms of recognizing people providing leadership in the legal community throughout the state. And it's important to recognize what folks are doing so that we can all kind of aspire to emulate their work and their dedication to access to justice. I know there's more, and if anybody wants to add to it, and I apologize, I don't have my laptop. I'm having a lot of technical issues, and all my notes are in there. So this is all coming out of my head. Anybody want to add to it?
Well, I will jump in with some of the stats from our, or the most important stat to me from our annual report is that 50% of the attendees identify themselves as from communities of color. And I think that that is 606 total attendees, 125 of them were virtual, but even the ones who were registered in person, many of them did a combination of in-person and virtual, which was quite interesting. And I think we now know what the future is going to look like. That is what the future of these conferences is going to look like. But 50% for communities of color, that is that is astounding. And it doesn't happen without intense efforts to get the word out to different communities. My internet is unstable, so I'm going to turn off my video. Other comments that people wanted to make about the conference?
I was just going to add, this is Diana, and since you mentioned, Terry, that over 50% were BIPOC communities attendees, I was also going to note that the presenters for the various sessions, I think it was, Bonnie could correct me, maybe 60% or more were presenters speaking from lived experience of systemic oppression of the topic of that session. And that we also were able to have a budget to pay people for their lived expertise, as well as offer a sliding scale for the registration and scholarships. So we had worked to make sure that the conference was both accessible and then also centered community.
Esperanza.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Boy, this thing is not working all the time. I was talking and it wasn't working. I just want to commend the committee because it did take an immense amount of work to be able to reach a level where we had the representation we did. A lot of outreach, a lot of talking to people, but that's what it takes. It takes that kind of work in order to have these kinds of results. And these results won't stay and they won't grow unless we continue to really work hard to do the kind of outreach that was done and have people that participated in the conference help to get more folks to come the next time and really look at the kind of agenda that we need to have for this kind of conference is going to be put together by the minds and the hearts of people that are most impacted. And so the committee did an exceptional job at making sure that we tried to reach that goal of accessibility, holding ourselves accountable, putting ourselves out there, and hoping that people it created some questions and challenges for all of us. But thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, SB. I'll just add, Diana and I were at the National Access to Justice Chairs and Commission meeting last week in Columbus, Ohio, and I would say that we are miles ahead of other states in the work that we have done to involve communities. Many of them are still very lawyer CLE focused, and they don't involve community voices nearly as much as we do. And so I think we should be quite pleased for our efforts here in Washington State.
I was just going to mention one more thing. Sorry, Terry. Yes, that happened when we were in Ohio, and it's always nice to get affirmation from folks across the country saying, Washington, you're always ahead and doing amazing things. So that always feels good. But I was also going to mention last Friday at the Board of Governors meeting of the Bar Association, they met and they had asked to put the Access to Justice conference on their agenda. One of their governors, Brent Williams-Ruth, because he was so inspired by attending that he was interested in how the Bar Association can continue to support the conference and actually increase its support and really bring more legal professionals to the conference. And noting that many of the people there noted that it's an opportunity for them to connect with client communities in the communities that we're all trying to serve. So I just wanted to note that, and I know Kari Petrasic, one of the governors, is here today and also attended the conference. So I think it's great that the Bar Association also sees the value of supporting the conference.
Other things that people wanted to say about the conference?
Hi, Chair. Do you guys have notes from the conference that you guys could collaborate on? And I don't know, I want to see if there's things that that we could copy from other places that are doing better than us. And I love hearing that we're doing such a good job of not just focusing on lawyer challenges.
Thank you, Jonas. There is a write-up in our annual report about the conference. I assume that went to CAP, but to the CAP members, but I'm not sure actually. So Bonnie would be the one to have that information. But in terms of write-ups about the individual sessions, I don't know what we did in terms of keeping those kinds of notes.
But there was an eval survey. There was a survey that went out, right?
Yes, there was. And
we
there's,
have those
and that
results.
information, yeah. And that information is being accumulated. We're looking at the, I'm not sure how many people filled out the evaluation form so that we can get feedback on how well we hit the mark on anything. But that's really important. And so in terms of notes, we need to figure out how to synthesize all that to make it useful, right? So other people can read it and see, like you said, Giannis, you know, what we might be able to do different, what can we improve, what can we learn from what other people have done. So that work is still going on.
Other comments about the conference? Can staff share what is available online, posted materials from Cesar?
Yeah, it's still being compiled and some of the videos are still in sort of post-production editing, but as soon as it's all ready, an email blast will go out to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And is that email also goes, I assume, to all attendees, all registrants? Yeah.
Yeah, it'll go to everyone who registered.
All right. So I think our next presenter will be here in a minute, unless there's anything else to add about the conference. I did want to share one other thing about the national conference that was remarkable. You know, we spend a lot of time in Washington worrying, I'll use the word worrying, about the urban rural divide, right? And the lack of services for folks in rural areas. This, I guess I shouldn't have been, but I was stunned. This is a national conversation. This is a huge issue. There were justices from New Mexico, where this is the problem is even more profound because there are just total legal deserts in some of these states. And it was interesting to hear the talking about what the different states have been doing to try to bridge some of these service divides, a lot of them involving local libraries. That local libraries would be the way that they would be able to get services to people through kiosks, through information centers, through several of them have a justice bus, and in all these different ways of serving rural areas. I think it was just really helpful to hear their perspective. I see Nick Straley here, who talked to the board when we were in Wenatchee about some of these same issues about serving rural areas. And so it was interesting to get that national perspective. So I'm assuming coordinators, yes. Okay, so our next presenter is here, Aurora Martin. Welcome.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for welcoming me. I'm just going to call on some of my other team members if I can have a minute or so.
Sure.
Thank you.
Actually, just to give Aurora a minute, I was just going to chime in to what Terry was sharing about the National ATJ conference and the legal deserts and the rural urban divide. One thing I thought was interesting was the funding, because of course, when you have big problems, you also need some big money. And a lot of the states who are trying to address this, and it's addressing in a number of different ways, but some of them had gotten funding from their state legislature for things like a loan repayment assistance program to attract people to go work in those areas, or to work on programs of sort of skilling up the people who are already in those communities and how to help them to get the skills they need to stay in those communities. And so I thought it was interesting to learn about the different funding sources. One person also shared about, like you said, Terry, public libraries, they have an interest, and so they have funding. You know, Ohio has a justice bus, as you mentioned, Terry, and actually it was Mercedes-Benz. They didn't give their bus for free, but they gave it at cost. So it's interesting to think creatively about different ways to consider funding for addressing all these different solutions.
Since there was a few minutes here, Diana, was most of the funding streams for kind of ATJ boards across this, were they mostly funded through bar dues, or or was it direct state funding? What was the different sources of funding for this?
Yeah, I think it's really all over the map. I mean, we didn't do a comprehensive survey. It's just in all the different conversations that Terry and I were each in. So one was directly from the legislature. I think it was Ohio. They got legislature funding from the legislature that actually went to the Department of Education to pay $50,000 loan payment assistance grant funds for people in their program. And so I think I remember someone talking about a different bar dues checkoff to have funding go towards that. So it was kind of all over the map. And then one other thing I was going to mention is the Department of Justice has a relatively new Access to Justice department that was created when the Biden administration started, and their Director Rossi, spoke a couple of times about the initiatives that they've been doing as they've just gotten fully staffed and ramping up. And they're really interested in working with ATJ commissions across the country because it's their work needs to be informed about what's happening on the ground in all the different states. And so they were very interested in hearing, well, they've already known about the real issue, but interested in seeing how they could be helpful with that and other things as well.
Thank you.
And I was just going to add that our because Oregon doesn't have an Access to Justice board, but we met several folks from Oregon who were there to explore it. So I see that we are now moving to environmental justice presentation from Front and Centered. So Aurora, take it away.
Thank you. I know that a number of my other team members are going to probably hop in. Thanks so much for having me and the team just at least take a few minutes of your time at the Access to Justice Board. As many of you know, I'm Aurora Martin, and it's really good to be with you all again after about, I think it's been 7 years since I've been with the Access to Justice Board, and just really good to be here and see a number of familiar faces, and also looking forward to meeting some new people as well. I wanted to actually make the case a little bit about environmental justice as access to justice. And so I wanted to share a bit about what I've been up to, the team of, and here they come. I just asked some of the advocacy team members from Friends, well, it's literally a doorbell, to join me today, because they are the ones who are the future, and they are the ones who are actually doing the work, and I'm just having a lot of fun. Friend-centered, wow, I guess I invited the whole team. No. Just as a little bit of an overview, I'm going to do a quick introduction in addition to my stand-up comedy here, a little bit of an overview of environmental and climate justice and what Front and Centered does and how we do. So really the kind of the why, the what, the how, and some of my team members will also be able to share a bit more of the specifics of the advocacy that we've been involved in. This is just a montage of Front and Centered. We are a statewide environmental justice and climate justice coalition of probably around 70 plus community groups. Several years ago, in 2015 or so, we came together, actually co-founded by a number of community groups who are already involved with the Access to Justice Board, such as, or civil legal aid in general, such as Community to Community. They are one of the co-founding organizations of Front and Centered. One America was as well, Got Green, Puget Sound Sage, and Iko Schaefer, who actually served at some point for a couple of years, I think, at the Access to Justice Board too. So we are the largest statewide coalition in the Northwest region that was founded for and still is for and by BIPOC community organizations. We have a diversity of missions and a diversity of portfolios of work, but we all come together around climate and environmental justice. And I came in at around 2019 to help transform them into an independent nonprofit that essentially serves as this backup support center for this growing coalition. And so I wanted to make sure that as we start kind of seeing, well, that it's been in the headlines in terms of climate change and environmental justice. It's been in the local headlines, it's been in the national headlines, it's been in the international headlines. And really, the work I believe that I've just started to learn about is the work that is a continuation of the work for justice that I started with all of you on the of equal justice and civil legal aid. And so as we start to see the opportunities, I think, to do systemic advocacy as well as individual advocacy, we wanted to make sure that we just kind of set the table about what it is that we mean by environmental justice. And in many ways, within the civil legal aid circle, we talk about low-income people. We talk about people in poverty, and those are the communities that we also are engaged with and working alongside with. And so when we think about environmental justice, Front and Centered, together with our allies nationally, it's about overburdened and vulnerable communities. That's another term that essentially is now out there statutorily as well. And we are fighting against the intersectional injustices that we experience in the neighborhoods or at work. It's very much about the collective efforts to advance the dignity and remedy the stark disparities in environmental health and well-being. At Front and Centered, the coalition really tries to operate along these principles. And it's about racial and economic analysis. We follow the leadership and the knowledge of our community coalition, who are disproportionately impacted by whether it's the air pollution, toxic water, lack of infrastructure, energy access issues. We also try and use targeted strategies to create net environmental and economic outcomes. And then we've really taken to heart what it means to advance a just transition. We're not going to have a chance to really go too much into what it is that we mean by a just transition. Many of you all may be familiar already with just transition as a concept. In fact, a couple of the lawyers who are part of our team are going to a conference, I believe, in the next week called the Just Transition Lawyering Institute. Some of the founders are also folks or alumni of the civil legal aid community nationally. So I think it's really timely for us in Washington State to really talk about the collaborations into the future. So how does Front and Centered do it? Front and Centered is present, at least currently, in these areas where we've got some dots. There are various coalition members, some with statewide constituencies, some that are very localized. We do policy as well as programmatic work, as well as capacity building. I'm the co-executive director of community capacity building, and my colleague Derek Gruen is co-executive director of policy and programs. But altogether, the what and the why and the how of Front and Centered is about bringing people together, influencing policies, and shifting the practice, both formally as well as in the community. So just a real quick thing on what it is that I do with a team of people as I continue to click this weird presentation here that I've actually just cut and pasted this particular slide. We do capacity building in this way. We see it as supporting the movement. And so my core team actually does a lot of these different things. Our main focus is about resourcing the movement and providing technical assistance, as well as providing platforms for community education, assistance with tool building that you'll see in a bit. We provide training and coaching, and also find ways in which we can put our community organizational leaders front and centered at the policy level and in front of funders and other influencers. So this is just a real quick summary slide about the kind of continuum of services that the capacity building work is about at front and centered. But I think what would be of more interest to the board is not these arrows, but the next slide. How we do it in terms of policy and programs, which I'm just about to hand over to Sierra, is that these are just samplings of what we do. We work on the statewide policy in terms of the most recent thing, the Healthy Environment for All Act, which was passed in 2021, the most ambitious environmental justice law and policy, arguably, in the country. And the coalition really worked hard. Its precursor was Initiative 1631 a few years back. But in addition to the advocacy that led to the HEAL Act, we also worked on 100% clean energy. And all of that actually rested on the creation of this powerful tool that the state has actually been using a lot of in the co-creation of the Environmental Health Disparities Map. That actually is a map that I believe Sierra or Nico will be able to talk a little bit more about, but essentially it's a platform that we co-created that allows for identifying where are the most polluted, overburdened communities, and also the other social determinants of health, which coincidentally also identifies the highest concentration of low income and communities of color. Another tool that we've been able to build is the Washington Transit Access Map, and then also this beta version of Ivan Washington, an environmental rapid reporting platform. So this is just a sampling of the kind of work that we're doing at Front and Centered that has been focused on legislative advocacy and regulatory reform, as well as tool building. We do a number of things, including reports and co-authoring sort of reports, as well as creating data visualization platforms with the University of Washington. We've consulted with the White House based on the Environmental Health Disparities Map, among other bodies of work. So right now I'm going to hand it over to Sierra, who will introduce herself as well as her portfolio of work and talk a little bit about membership. Sierra?
Yeah, thank you, Aurora. If you actually want to go back just one slide, that would be great. Thank you. As Aurora said, my name is Sierra Suafoa McLean. I'm the program engagement lead with Front and Centered. I've been with the org about 1.5 years now, which is super exciting. Before that, I'm born and raised in Tacoma, went to undergrad in Seattle before going to law school out in Vermont and then moving back. So very excited to be back here. I was also an intern for WSBA when I was in undergrad. So it's really exciting to see some friendly faces. Shout out to Bonnie and Diana. Lovely to see you again. But yeah, I just wanted to add to what Aurora said, really to hone into that point of Front and Centered's coalition is really targeting both short-term and long-term solutions. So a lot of the capacity stuff that Aurora went over target those basic needs. So we really want to make sure that our members are being able to consistently serve their communities to get the food that they need, the help that they need, and really benefit those daily lives. On the programmatic side, as Aurora touched on, we are focusing on the long-term solutions. So really focusing on ways to create policy and programmatic things that change the system and that are created by and for frontline communities. And yeah, that's really all I wanted to add. So I'll pass it to Devin, and I know Guillermo's on our line too, and they can kind of ground us in some of the examples a little bit more in depth of what Aurora said. So Devin, I'll pass it to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Sierra. My name is Devin Diaz, Policy Coordinator for Front and Centered, he, him pronouns. I'm actually based in the Tri-Cities, Washington, over in Benton and Franklin counties on the southeastern part of the state. Been living in the Tri-Cities since 2007 and consider Washington my home. Currently, with my role at Front and Centered, I actively engage with state agencies and the Environmental Justice Council to facilitate the implementation of the HEAL Act. It is vital to underscore the fundamental responsibility of government agencies in advancing environmental justice within their operations. The following actions are indispensable for nurturing inclusive and sustainable frontline communities. The first is integrating environmental justice consideration into agency planning documents, such as strategic plans, formulating a comprehensive strategy for community engagement and public participation. Also embedding environmental justice principles into the decision-making process for budgets and funding allocations within the 7 obligated HEAL agencies. And lastly, conducting environmental justice assessments for all significant agency actions encompassing rulemaking, legislative requests, capital projects, and investments. I also work with Front and Centered's identifying violations affecting neighborhoods, or IVAN, Washington, which is a community-based monitoring system where community members report environmental hazards within their neighborhood. We've recently formed the IVAN Washington Community and Government Work Group, and the goal of this work group is to address the challenges and barriers to environmental hazard reporting and craft solutions to responding and resolving those reported hazards with the community and with government agencies. And it's a community government model similar to the environmental health disparities map. That was a co-governance work group that over several years led to that map. And we're hoping to replicate a similar model with IVAN Washington to resolve environmental health hazards in frontline communities. And I'll pass it to Guillermo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Guillermo Rogel, and I'm the legislative advocate with Front and Centered. Just want to thank you all for having us today. And really what we try to do here at Front and Centered is make sure that our community voices are heard in Washington state, specifically the state legislature. And we know that that's not an easy task, especially when we're doing coalition work. We want to make sure that our members are represented accurately. And when it comes to community engagement, that the state legislature, state agencies, the governor's office are putting in the work to make sure that the community engagement that they are doing, whether it be on a budget bill, on a policy bill, is authentic and gives community enough time to make sure that they can actively participate in the legislative process. But outside of that as well, we are originating policy, whether that be the HEAL Act, as Devin had mentioned, or making sure that we are actively proposing policies related to energy or transportation work. We want to be there. So heading into this legislative session, we have the HEAL Act defined, defining environmental justice, but we want to make sure that it's not just something that legislators are talking about, but that they are actively putting into practice in all climate legislation. And one of those is going to be the budget, specifically how the state is allocating all of the revenue that is being generated through the cap and trade program, and making sure that they are meeting their obligation to fund overburdened communities at the levels that we know they need to be funded at. There's a 35% goal related to the HEAL Act and through the Climate Commitment Act. It's just the floor, and we want to see that we can actually get Washington State to go above and beyond that 35% goal. We have an analysis that says that the legislature is falling short of that goal, and even falling just 1% under that goal means hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for our communities to see the benefit from. That their communities are actually seeing lower levels of emission, that their life expectancy is going up, that they're seeing improvements in their transit systems, in climate resiliency, weatherization of their homes. So there's a lot of work to do in the legislature, as you all probably already work in, but we just want to make sure that our community members' voices are heard, not just during the legislative process, but also year round. So just want to thank you all again for the time, and I think I'll throw it back to Aurora. Aurora, you muted. Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Thanks, Guillermo. I think the next slide is going to be covered by Marielle, and then we will be wrapping it up with Nico. Marielle?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Marielle Thurasingham, and I am Clean Energy Policy Lead with Front and Centered. Just following up on a lot that my colleagues have shared. We do work in the energy space that both relates to kind of legislative advocacy and regulatory reforms and advocacy. Passing the Clean Energy Transformation Act in 2019 was kind of a big win for us, particularly the equitable distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens requirement that made it into that law as a mandate for all utilities who are transitioning off fossil fuel and high emitting sources of electricity towards clean power sources. So those targets for the transition were set, and that was sort of the obvious purpose of the law. And then kind of an absolute requirement that is required in or is part of facilitating that transition is equitable distribution. And so bringing that to how utilities operate in providing power and how they are kind of responsive to customer needs and to impacts on communities from their decision making, from kind of the source like the resources that are sourcing the electricity to like the workforce that they engage with, how they contract, how they're involved in building out the grid and transmission line siting and clean energy facility development and siting. There's a lot. There's so many ways that kind of utilities influence lives and impact communities, and that's how power and energy, essential resources, are supplied to consumers, to customers, to communities, and we all need power for daily life, or just basic survival, but particularly overburdened communities, highly impacted communities, vulnerable populations who are at higher risk of harm from having their power disconnected or from outages, from not having access. Require special protections and require action, interventions. A lot of movement from utilities and from regulators and from policy to ensure that access is there, that it's improved. So we work towards improving how assistance is made available and how utilities are and entities in the power space are incorporating access, like reducing barriers to access as kind of a critical priority. They're also doing targeted and prioritized outreach and programming so that clean energy projects that will benefit customers will actually reach folks who are historically kind of the last to be reached, or are not participating in the same rates that higher wealth communities are in clean energy programs. So affordable energy, not getting disconnected from power, and being able to access kind of clean power, which is essential for kind of reaching our climate justice kind of targets, which is we need this climate to function, and we can't have frontline and fence line communities who are impacted, who continue to be impacted to the point of having their entire lives at risk, and their health and kind of their community culture and identity, and also empowering communities to participate in decisions around how our energy system is going to transition effectively to clean in a way that is that centers community interests and voices. So we work towards getting our better laws passed, opposing laws that are not in line with energy justice, and definitely how laws are implemented, making sure that we're active in rulemakings. And even just as recently as kind of the height of the pandemic, which is recent, but also it's been years, one of our members, Puget Sound Sage, was leading an effort to extend the moratorium on disconnections of power. And that effort took place in the Utilities and Transportation Commission, took place in front of the governor, and it was successful. The moratorium was extended and continued to be extended for beyond almost any other state in the country, to ensure that people were not cut off from power when public health and economic insecurity were at a height due to the pandemic. And we supported them and also worked towards building a coalition with other allies. So definitely wanted to share about the work of some of our members and kind of collaborations and partnerships being really, really critical to kind of the influence that we have around energy justice. Nico?
Nico Wettikin, the attorney with Front and Centered, joined about half a year ago officially, but had been working with Front and Centered for a while prior to that while I was at UW Law doing a postgrad fellowship. I wanted to speak a little bit about how we see a connection between what you've heard about environmental justice and climate justice, and what we see as the goals and priorities of the ATJ board, and sort of how we see some alignment there. I think the underlying note is that it's just a different lens from which to look at the same systematic issues. We're noting economic barriers, race-based disparities, geographic disparities in quality of service, any number of other factors in the not only the legal access, but the regulatory structure, general engagement from government. And so I think that that's something that we're actively fighting against, and you've heard that from the different areas that we're in, be that the regulatory structure around energy provision, be that Ivan, so that there's community reporting with community at the lead of that reporting and government being more transparent with the response rates there, and community engagement and communities assemblies, trying to just get more community voice out there. We're trying to expand our work to ensure that we can help meet these needs, but we also recognize that we alone cannot do that, and that we're not operating in this sphere alone. The ATJ board is there. The ATJ board is doing great work, but we also want to recognize that we're trying to do this and trying to figure out best practices. So as we're moving forward, we're definitely hoping to connect, share lessons, and generally support each other in this effort to ensure that we can continue to expand our legal services on our side. We're hoping and thinking about, and Aurora and I have been putting our heads together around what it would look like to provide direct legal services to our either members or just generally in the EJ, CJ sphere. We're also hoping to expand how much direct access community gets to regulators and key policymakers. You heard Guillermo talk about his experience, Marielle talk about her experience, and getting through there. And then as well, we've been expanding our funding opportunities for our members and hoping to take on a larger role there. We know the ATJ board has done a lot of this, so we would really love to learn more lessons from your all experiences, and get a little bit more on our end as well. I don't know if Aurora had any more closing thoughts, but I know y'all have to run to other meetings, so I wanted to keep this short.
Thanks, Nico. I'm gonna try and figure out how to stop share here. How do I stop share, Aurora? It's like, there we go. All right. Well, real quick, I know we went over our time, a lot of time, but that's what I probably do, is I do too much. But we just wanted to at least provide an introduction about environmental justice, what Front and Center does. And having grown up in legal aid, I just kind of felt like the time is now. I just came from a few months ago, actually, I just didn't come from this conference, but there was a conference hosted by the Deep South Center in New Orleans. And there were a few hundred people there, and probably close to 100 organizations focused on the opportunities that are unprecedented for essentially resourcing overburdened communities with a focus on climate change and environmental harms. And so there was much talk about the systemic legal advocacy that was definitely needed, and there wasn't enough coordination and communication between what civil legal aid can do and the public interest lawyer community can do with the hundreds of thousands of community organizations that are engaged in the policy work, that are engaged in the grassroots work. And so here in Washington, I think we can do things differently. Front and Centered being founded and being the largest communities of color led environmental justice group, I think there are many opportunities. And so the ask here is just to get to know us and to stay in touch. We have a number of events. There's going to be legislative briefings that we offer, but then also, as Nico pointed out, we actually are kind of putting our heads together about the creation of an environmental justice and climate justice sort of practice group. So we really want to kind of just cultivate or recultivate this relationship between civil legal aid as well as our environmental justice coalition. So I'll stop there because I know you all have some important business to get to, but also happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you, Aurora, and your team from Front and Centered. Are there questions?
I just had a question about what you just mentioned, Aurora, about your thoughts about possibly creating a practice group. Is that bringing together both folks that you're currently working with and then others who may be new to the practice or interested in maybe, thinking about civil legal aid providers, how they apply environmental justice lens to what they're doing? I guess I just want to know a little bit more about your ideas for that practice group.
Yes. And as Nico had indicated, this is another lens to the work that civil legal aid is already involved in, both on an individual services level as well as systemic advocacy level. So our goal is to kind of create an environmental justice kind of practice group of advocates, not just sort of practicing lawyers. We're hoping to host a series of briefings, but also just kind of meetups. And so one concrete example would be we continue to do work, or actually C2C, community to community, led by Rosalinda Guillen up in Northwest Washington, and collaborating with Familias Unidas por la Justicia, Farm Worker Union. They talk about, within the civil legal aid context, worker rights, overtime issues, heat-related illness. We also bring that in, and those stories within the Environmental Justice Council. The other lens here that accesses resources as well as regulatory change allows us to say that heat-related illness and issues of pesticide protection and issues of overtime are issues that are more intensified in a quicker cyclical nature as a result of climate change and wildfires and everything else that kind of comes together. So these are the conversations that are very intersectional and cannot afford to be compartmentalized, that we just need to start talking. So our hope is that within the next few months, we'll be able to organize and host a meetup for folks within our community, as well as opening it up to public interest lawyers. We've worked with private firms as well, Cascadia Law being one that has done pro bono work with us on the HEAL Act. But I think now is the time, if there is an opportunity within legal aid, to really think about this additional lens and actually new portfolio of work. There is a host of different kinds of systemic advocacy that we could undertake, and big oil being one of them, of course, when we talk about fossil fuels and climate change. And we need more legal advocacy to add to our toolbox of organizing, mobilizing, and advocating and resourcing the movement with more funds. Our side.
So, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, since we do have some more business, I just wanted to, I saw one more question from Jeremiah. Nope, Jeremiah is waving. So, because we do want to get to this last piece, any last comment that you would like to add, Aurora?
Thank you, Terry. What I think I can do is send along a copy of this set of slides over to Diana, and then hopefully what we can do is also just kind of keep the lines of communication open regarding upcoming events as well. I just wanted to make sure that a number of my my team members were here to just do the preliminary introduction to at least provide some kind of food for thought. As you all think about environmental justice, you can contact us.
Well, super. And your team was very well represented today at the Access to Justice meeting. So thank you and all of your team members for your presentation today. All right. So, our last item is the OCLA director search, and this is just an update. This is actually not an action item, but a report out. So in the working session, the ATJ board ratified the decision of the OCLA Director Search Committee and will send those names to the Supreme Court today. I cannot announce them right now because those people have not been notified yet that their names are being sent to the Supreme Court. I will say that we had 4 excellent candidates, so that was great. Great for us since we need to send 3 names to the Supreme Court. And it was a culmination of a 9-month search process where we were, as you know, we had representatives from the ATJ board, from our community advisory panel, from the OCLA Oversight Committee, and from the providers and from the staff. So I think we had a really good perspective during the search. What I will say, if in case you missed the Access to Justice Board meeting with the Supreme Court on October 25th, and I can't imagine people watch TVW in their spare time, but some of the things that I mentioned to the Supreme Court that I think are worrisome about the search going forward, not our current results, but if they wanted to make some changes, now would be a good time to change the OCLA director statute to give more clarity as to who should be on the search committee, to revisit this issue of whether the director needs to have 5 years service in this state, 5 years admission to practice in this state or if in any state, and whether there needs to be some more consideration, given the size of the agency, about whether the salary is commensurate with the amount of work required. So those are the kind of high notes that we gave to the Supreme Court. We will be in touch with the court. We are 10 days. We are 10 days early. The deadline they originally gave us was November 17th. And now it turns out that on November 17th, the Supreme Court is going to meet with the finalists in person, and they're going to make their own decision about the next OCLA director. So that's what we know. The search committee has completed its work on time. The ATJ board has completed what was statutorily required. So it's not, I mean, I'll be honest, wasn't without its bumps, but we have come to an excellent place. So I'm happy to take any questions. Cesar.
So I guess the question is whether, and I don't know how expensive to get this, but whether the submission that went before the ATJ board is going to be shared either with the committee and or the board and or more broadly once the individuals are notified. I'm not sure what the process is on that.
I have that same question, and actually, I think I'm going to send that question to the search committee. That is the one thing that we didn't discuss, is when does this become public? And so, and I know that there's been a question among the OCLA staff about knowing what was the recommendation that was that's going to be sent to the Supreme Court. But I'm going to have to email the search committee and say, because again, the statute is silent about the process. And we certainly didn't want to reveal any names before the people themselves were contacted, but I don't have a good answer. And hopefully our search committee members will have a path forward on that.
Thanks.
And you as a search committee member may have input into what we should do. So
I just assumed that the consultant's transmission, the committee's transmission to the ATJ board would be shared with the committee. Just, I mean, obviously I know what the participants and the committee decision was, but I was surprised that that hadn't been shared when it was shared with the ATJ board, at least with the committee. And I'll await your email in terms of thinking about how to proceed on the publicity side.
All right. Other questions? All right, seeing none, are there announcements? The next Access to Justice Board meeting will be Friday, December 1st. That's on our agenda. Any other announcements that people want to make? People are dropping off like flies, so I guess there are no announcements. Well, in that case, good to see everyone. Thank you again for your attention and attending the meeting, and we will be in touch. Take care.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.